You think anyone in here is going to help you? Look around, sweetheart. Nobody's coming. Logan Mercer laughed as he said it loud enough for the whole diner to hear. And the worst part, he was right. Every single person in that room looked away. Every single one, except one man sitting alone in the corner booth who very slowly set down his coffee cup. Sophie Blake was already on the floor trembling, trying to cover herself with her hands, while her torn skirt lay scattered across the linoleum like something broken that could never be fixed. If this story already has your heart racing, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop the name of your city in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. Stay with me all the way to the end. You will not regret it. Sophie Blake had learned a long time ago that life didn't warn you before it hit you. It didn't send a letter. It didn't knock twice. It just walked right through your front door at the worst possible moment and reminded you exactly how small you were. She had been working the closing shift at the Desert Mile Diner for 3 years. 3 years of split tips and sore feet, and customers who called her darling like it was her actual name. 3 years of smiling through the exhaustion because her brother Danny needed school supplies, and the electric bill was always 2 weeks late, and smiling was free, even when everything else cost something. She wasn't unhappy. That was the thing people never understood about women like Sophie Blake. She wasn't drowning, she was swimming. Hard. Every single day. And she was proud of that even when nobody else noticed. That night started the same as every other night. The bell above the door rang at 9:47 p.m. and 4 young men walked in like they owned the place. Sophie didn't look up right away. She was refilling coffee for a trucker named Earl, who always tipped $3 and said, "God bless you, miss," on his way out. And that was worth more to her than whatever these new arrivals were going to order. But she felt it. The shift in the room. The way the other waitress, Carla, suddenly found somewhere else to be. The way the cook, Marcus, got very quiet behind the pass-through window. Sophie looked up. The one in front was tall, maybe 26 or 27, with the kind of face that had never been told no, not once in his entire life. His shirt was the kind of casual expensive that costs $400 to look like it costs $40. His watch caught the fluorescent light and threw it back at her like a warning. She recognized him. Everybody in that part of Arizona recognized the Mercer name. His father, Victor Mercer, had been buying up land in the county for 2 years. Casino development, they called it. Progress, they said. Sophie's father had called it something different, but her father was dead, and dead men's words don't echo as loud as billionaires' press releases. "Table for 4, the tall one said. He didn't look at her when he said it. He was already looking at his phone. "Of course," Sophie said. "Right this way." She led them to the large corner table near the window, handed out menus, took drink orders with the automatic precision of someone who had done it 10,000 times. She was almost back to the counter when he spoke again. "Hey, waitress." She turned. "Yes." "This table's sticky." She looked at it. It wasn't. She had wiped it down herself 30 minutes ago. "I can wipe it down again for you," she said evenly. "I mean, it's disgusting," he said louder now, making sure the other customers heard. "Like this whole place. What exactly are you people proud of here?" One of his friends snickered. Another one was already filming on his phone. Sophie felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear. Not yet. Just the familiar, exhausting awareness that this was going to be one of those nights. The kind where you smile and absorb and swallow it all down because you need the tribe more than you need your dignity, and that is the ugliest math a person is ever forced to do. "I'll get you a clean cloth," she said. She turned to walk away, and that's when his hand shot out and grabbed her arm. Not rough exactly, just possessive, like she was something he could touch without asking. "I wasn't done talking to you," Logan Mercer said. The diner got quieter, not completely silent, not yet, but the kind of quiet where conversations lower half a volume and everyone suddenly finds their coffee very interesting. "Sir," Sophie said carefully, "I need to get back to." "You need to do what I tell you to do," he said. And there was something in his voice that was almost bored, like cruelty was so natural to him that it didn't even require effort anymore. She pulled her arm back. He let go, but he was smiling when he did it, and somehow the smile was worse than the grip. She got through the next 20 minutes on autopilot, brought their drinks, took their food orders, kept her voice steady and her face neutral. She had survived worse than rich boys with bad manners. She told herself that. But Logan Mercer was watching her every time she passed the table. Not with attraction, with something colder than that. The way a kid watches an ant before deciding whether to step on it. The breaking point came over a plate of fries. "These are cold," he announced, loud enough to turn heads across the diner. "I can have them remade," Sophie said. "They're disgusting." He shoved the plate toward the edge of the table and she caught it just before it fell. "What do you people even do back there? Just stand around collecting minimum wage?" "I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll have fresh ones out." "I don't want fresh ones." He leaned back in his chair and something dark moved behind his eyes. "I want you to admit this whole place is a dump and the food is garbage, and people like you should just—" "Logan." One of his friends said it quietly like a warning, but Logan wasn't in the mood for warnings. "Should just accept that some jobs exist for people who can't do better." The diner was silent now. Completely. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped. Sophie felt heat rise up the back of her neck. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she hated that her body was giving him something he hadn't earned. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose and said very quietly, "I'll get those fries remade." She turned away, and he grabbed her apron string. It happened so fast that she didn't fully understand it until it was over. He grabbed the back of her apron, which was tied over her skirt, and he pulled not just the apron but the tie of her skirt too, the cheap fabric that had been washed too many times and was already weak at the seams, and it tore. The sound was small, a little ripping sound, but in that silence it was the loudest thing Sophie had ever heard in her life. She felt the cold air before she fully processed what had happened, felt people looking, heard the sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the counter, heard Logan's friends laugh, that horrible, helpless, ugly laughter of people who know something is wrong but laugh anyway because laughing is easier than stopping it. Sophie dropped to the floor. Not because she fell, because instinct took over, because every nerve in her body said, "Get down, get small, get covered." And so she went to her knees on the cold linoleum and grabbed at the torn fabric and tried to hold it together with both hands, while the heat of humiliation crashed over her in a wave so big she couldn't breathe through it. She heard a phone camera click, then another. Then someone whispered, "Oh my God." And Logan Mercer looked down at her on the floor on her knees and said it. "You think anyone in here is going to help you? Look around, sweetheart. Nobody's coming." He said it with the casual confidence of a man who had tested that theory before and found it reliable. And the worst part, the part that would live with Sophie Blake for the rest of her life, was that for exactly 4 seconds, she believed him. She looked up from the floor. She looked at Earl the trucker, who was staring at his coffee cup. At the young couple near the window, the woman with her hand over her mouth, the man looking firmly away. At Carla, the waitress, who had her back to the whole thing and was very busy reorganizing napkins. At Marcus through the kitchen window, who had stepped back from the pass-through into the shadows. 4 seconds. She believed him, and then she heard it. A sound she couldn't name at first, not a voice, not a shout, just the sound of a single chair scraping across linoleum. Slow, deliberate, like someone had made a very calm decision and was now standing up to act on it. She turned her head. In the darkest corner booth, the one near the emergency exit that nobody ever chose because the overhead light had been burned out for 6 months, a man stood up. He was enormous. Not in a showy way, not gym-built and manicured, just large in the way that men get when physical work has shaped them over decades, broad across the shoulders, with a thickness to him that seemed geological, like something carved rather than grown. His hair was dark with gray threading through it. His face was weathered in the way that faces get when they have spent a long time outdoors in harsh conditions and indoors in harsher ones. He was wearing a leather vest over a dark shirt, and on the back of that vest were words that every person in that diner recognized, even the tourists who had never seen it before, because some names travel on reputation alone. Hell's Angles. Not a logo you saw on a keychain, not a costume. The real thing, worn soft and dark with years of use, with patches that meant something to the people who understood what patches meant. His name was Jackson Creed, though Sophie didn't know that yet. All she knew was that he had stood up. He crossed the diner without hurrying. That was the thing people would talk about later, the lack of hurry, the absolute unhurried certainty with which he moved, like a man who has nothing to prove because everything has already been tested. Logan Mercer saw him coming and did the thing that rich boys always do when they get nervous. He tried to look unconcerned. "Can I help you, old man?" Logan said. Jackson stopped in front of him. He didn't look at Logan's friends. He didn't look around the room. He looked directly at Logan Mercer with a steadiness that was more frightening than any raised voice. "You're going to help her up," Jackson said. His voice was low and flat and unhurried the way a statement of fact is low and flat and unhurried. "And then you're going to look at her while you apologize, not at the floor, at her face." Logan laughed. It was a short, reflexive laugh, the kind that insecure people produce when they need to signal to their audience that they are still in control. "Or what?" Logan said. Jackson said nothing. He just held eye contact, and something about that silence was so absolute, so completely without performance, that Logan's laugh faded about 2 seconds after it started. "Look," one of Logan's friends said, standing up, "you don't know who you're messing with." He didn't finish the sentence. Jackson moved with a precision that had nothing theatrical about it. His elbow connected with the side of the friend's jaw with the efficient, minimal force of someone who was not trying to impress anyone, only trying to accomplish something specific. The friend dropped back into the booth seat and sat very still. The diner held its breath. "Your turn," Jackson said to Logan, as if the interruption had been minor. Logan Mercer had never in his life been looked at the way Jackson Creed was looking at him. He had been looked at with admiration, with envy, with resentment, with attraction, but not like this. Not with this particular quality of not anger, not even contempt, exactly, just a complete, terrifying refusal to be impressed by anything Logan Mercer had to offer. "You have about 5 seconds," Jackson said, "before this becomes a different kind of conversation." "I'll have you arrested," Logan said, but his voice had thinned. "My father owns half this county." "Help her up," Jackson said, "and apologize. That's all I'm asking. Do it now and we're done here." There was a pause that felt much longer than it was. And then slowly, with the stiff, furious, humiliated reluctance of a man who knows he has no other choice, Logan Mercer leaned down towards Sophie Blake, who was still on the floor clutching her torn skirt, and said in a voice scraped clean of everything except raw discomfort, "I'm sorry." He didn't help her up. He couldn't bring himself to do that. But he said it, and everyone in that diner heard it. Jackson reached down and offered Sophie his hand, not with any drama or ceremony, just extended it palm up and waited. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. He pulled her to her feet with the careful steadiness of someone who understood that what she needed right now was not strength, but stability. "You okay, Ta?" he asked quietly. Just for her. She nodded even though she wasn't. She nodded because some things you do on autopilot when your whole body is still shaking and the room is still watching and your mind is 3 seconds behind everything that just happened. "Carla," Sophie heard Marcus say from the kitchen, "get the girl something to change into." Carla, who had been standing very still near the counter with wide eyes, nodded quickly and disappeared toward the back. Logan Mercer was on his feet now, his face a dark, ugly red. "This isn't over," he said to Jackson, low and cold. "No," Jackson agreed, "it isn't." Something moved across Logan's face, some recognition of the double meaning, and for the first time Sophie saw something in Logan Mercer that she had not expected to see. Schwang. Fear. Not the ordinary kind, the deep kind. The kind that comes from understanding in your gut that you have just done something that cannot be undone. Logan left. His friends filed out behind him, one of them still rubbing his jaw, none of them making eye contact with anyone. The bell above the door rang and they were gone. The diner exhaled. And then slowly, awkwardly, the way people do, when they realize they have been caught not doing the right thing, people started looking at Sophie. Some with guilt, some with sympathy. Earl the trucker pulled a 20 from his wallet and laid it on the counter without a word. The young couple near the window, the woman with her hand still pressed to her mouth, watched Sophie with wet eyes. 3 people in the diner had been filming. The video would be online by midnight. By morning, 60,000 people would have watched a young waitress on the floor of an Arizona diner and a biker with cold eyes standing up in a room full of cowards. By the following evening, it would be 2 million. But Sophie Blake didn't know any of that yet. She was standing in the middle of the Desert Mile diner in a borrowed apron, her hands still shaking, watching Jackson Creed walk back toward the corner booth. "Wait," she said. He stopped. She crossed the diner toward him. She wasn't entirely sure what she was going to say. "Thank you" felt too small, And there was something about the way he had said this isn't over back to Logan that was still moving around in her chest trying to find a place to land. I've seen men do that before, she said. Step in. You know, in situations like that, they always want something afterward. It wasn't a polite thing to say. She knew that, but polite had been beaten out of her tonight, and what was left was raw and honest, and she couldn't manage anything else. Jackson looked at her. His expression didn't change. I don't want anything, he said. Then why? He was quiet for a moment. Not thinking about what to say, she sensed, more like deciding how much truth to offer. Because my daughter was someone's age once, he said, and someone didn't step in when they should have. The sentence landed with a weight that Sophie felt in her sternum. She didn't ask him what he meant. She didn't ask who his daughter was or what had happened. Some truths you recognize by the shape of the silence around them. I'm Sophie, she said. Jackson? She nodded. He sat back down. She looked at the cold coffee on the table and went to the counter and got him a fresh cup without asking, because some things you know to do without being told. She brought it back and set it down in front of him. It's on the house, she said. He looked at it for a moment. Then he wrapped both hands around the mug and said nothing. And Sophie Blake stood in the wreckage of the worst hour of her adult life and felt, for reasons she couldn't entirely explain, the very first small thread of something that was not quite hope, but was close enough to start with. She had no way of knowing in that moment that the man sitting in the corner booth had driven 1,100 miles without a specific destination. No way of knowing that he had been moving for 3 years without stopping, because stopping meant sitting still with the grief, and the grief was the kind that could swallow a man whole if he gave it the chance. No way of knowing that her father's name was written in a notebook inside the saddlebag of Jackson Creed's motorcycle parked outside in the desert dark. And no way of knowing that the night she had just survived, the worst night, the night she had been sure would break her, was not the beginning of her destruction. It was the beginning of something else entirely, something neither of them had a word for yet. But it was coming, fast. The video went live at 11:58 p.m. Sophie didn't post it. She didn't even know about it until Carla called her at 6 in the morning, voice sharp, with something that was equal parts excitement and alarm. Sophie, you need to look at your phone, right now. Carla, it's 6. Right now, Sophie. She looked. 300,000 views. The number was so far outside her frame of reference that she stared at it the way you stare at a word you've read too many times it stopped making sense. The thumbnail was her. On the floor. Hands clutching the torn fabric of her skirt, face turned sideways, and you could see exactly what kind of terror that was. Not movie terror, not dramatic terror, the small, private, collapsing terror of someone who suddenly understands that they are completely alone. And then the comments. She read the first 20 and had to put the phone face down on the kitchen table. Danny came in from the hallway, 17 years old and still carrying that particular teenage quality of looking half asleep even when he was fully awake. He looked at her face and stopped. What happened? He said. Nothing, she said automatically. Then, because he was old enough to find out anyway, and she would rather he heard it from her. Someone filmed something at the diner last night. It's online. Danny picked up her phone before she could stop him. She watched his face while he watched it, watched the sleep clear from his eyes and something harder, older move in behind it. Who is he? Danny said quietly. She didn't ask who he meant. She knew he wasn't talking about Logan. His name is Jackson, she said. He was just a customer. Danny kept watching. She saw his jaw tighten. Where is he now? I don't know. He left after closing. Danny set the phone down carefully, the way you set something down when you are trying very hard not to throw it. Sophie, he said, and the way he said her name low and controlled made her realize her little brother had been growing up while she wasn't paying close enough attention. That guy, Logan. Do you know who his father is? Victor Mercer, I know. Do you know what Victor Mercer does to people who get in his way? The questions sat between them. Danny. Dad knew, Danny said. That's what I'm saying. Dad knew exactly who Victor Mercer was, and look what happened to Dad. The kitchen went very quiet. Their father, Robert Blake, had died 18 months ago. The official finding was a single-car accident on Route 9, a stretch of highway he had driven 100 times. The investigators said he fell asleep at the wheel. Sophie had never fully believed that, but grief has a way of making you accept the convenient explanation because the alternative is a weight you can't carry while also paying the electric bill and making sure your brother gets to school. She had put it away, filed it under things she couldn't afford to think about. Danny had not. "We need to be careful," he said. "We were always careful." More careful than that. He picked up her phone again and showed her the screen. The view count had jumped while they were talking. 412,000. "This isn't going away, Sophie. This is getting bigger." She took the phone from him and looked at the number for a long moment. She had spent 3 years being invisible, working double shifts, staying quiet, asking for nothing, making no waves, occupying the smallest possible amount of space in a world that seemed to want her smaller and smaller. And in one night, without choosing it, she had become the face of something. She didn't fully understand what yet, but she could feel the size of it pressing against her from the outside. "Go to school," she told Danny. "Sophie, please." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to go to school and let me think." He went, but at the door he turned back and said, "His name is Jackson Creed." She blinked. "What? The biker?" Someone in the comments identified him. "Jackson Creed." Danny paused. "Look him up, Sophie." "I already did." The door closed behind him. She looked him up. Jackson Creed, 44 years old, former U.S. Army Ranger, 2 tours decorated, former member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, current ranking officer, and then buried in a local Nevada news article from 3 years ago, the kind of article that didn't get many clicks because it was about people nobody was paying attention to. She found the rest of it. House fire, rural Nevada, his wife Claire Creed, 39, his daughter Maya Creed, 8 years old. Fire department ruled it accidental. Faulty wiring, no arrests. Sophie read the article 3 times. Then she sat at her kitchen table for a long time, not moving, with the phone in her hands and a feeling building in her chest that she couldn't name yet, part grief, part recognition, part something that felt dangerously close to suspicion. Faulty wiring, accidental, like a man who had driven a road 100 times falling asleep at the wheel. She was still sitting there when someone knocked on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Carla sometimes stopped by, but Carla always texted first. She crossed to the door and looked through the peephole and felt her stomach drop. 2 men in suits stood on her porch. Not police, their posture was wrong. For police, too relaxed, too casual, the kind of casual that is performed rather than natural. One of them was holding a business card between 2 fingers. She did not open the door. "Ms. Blake," the closer one said loud enough to carry through the wood. "We represent Mercer Development Group. We'd like to speak with you about last night's incident. We think there may have been some misunderstanding that we can clear up very quickly to everyone's benefit." She pressed her back against the door and breathed. "Ms. Blake, if we could just have 5 minutes. I'm calling my attorney," she said. She didn't have an attorney. She said it anyway. A pause. "Of course," the man said smoothly. "We'll leave our card." She heard it slide under the door. "We genuinely hope we can resolve this without things becoming complicated for everyone involved." She listened to their footsteps cross the porch, listened to a car door open and close and an engine start and pull away. Then she stood there for another full minute before she moved. She picked up the business card. Mercer Development Group. And in pen on the back, someone had written a number with a note underneath it. "Before this gets out of hand." Her hands weren't shaking this time. She was angry. She grabbed her keys. She drove to the Desert Mile Diner without a clear plan, which in retrospect she would recognize as the kind of decision you make when your emotions are moving faster than your judgment. She just needed to be somewhere familiar, somewhere she knew the layout and the smells and the particular quality of the silence, because her apartment had started to feel like a room with walls moving inward. Marcus was there prepping for the lunch shift, and he looked at her with the exhausted expression of a man who has seen too much and expected most of it. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I work here." "After what happened last night, Sophie." "Did anyone else come in this morning?" she asked. "Before opening. Anyone asking about me?" Marcus was quiet for 1 beat too long. "Marcus." "A man called," he said finally, "about 8 this morning. Said he was a reporter. Asked if you'd be in today." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know your schedule." He paused. "But Sophie, there were 2 other calls. They didn't say who they were, just asked if you worked here and when you came in." The anger that had been keeping her upright tilted slightly into something colder. She was pulling out her phone to call Carla when the bell above the door rang. She turned. Jackson Creed walked in. He was wearing the same leather vest. He looked like he hadn't slept, but it didn't diminish him. It just made him look more like what he was, which was a man accustomed to being awake when other people were resting because wakefulness was safer. He scanned the diner in one sweep, the automatic threat assessment of someone trained to do it without thinking. And when his eyes landed on her, something shifted in his expression that she couldn't fully read. "I was going to leave," he said. "I was about 60 miles out when I turned around." "Why?" He reached into his vest pocket and set something on the counter between them. It was a photograph. Old creased at the corners, the color slightly faded the way that photos get when they've been handled regularly over years. It showed two men standing in front of what looked like a construction site laughing at something off camera. One of the men was younger, dark-haired, with an easy smile. Sophie's breath stopped. "That's my father," she said. "Yes," Jackson said. "Where did you get this?" "The man he's standing next to," Jackson said quietly. "That's my father-in-law, Claire's dad. He worked land development in Nevada for 20 years. And Robert Blake, your father, he was the county surveyor who signed off on the permits for the Mercer Development Project in Kingman County, 3 years before it broke ground, before anyone knew who Victor Mercer was in this part of the state." The diner was very still. "Your father found something," Jackson said. "Something in those permits. I don't know exactly what. But my father-in-law found it too, and he came to your father, and then my father-in-law had a heart attack at 61 years old with no prior cardiac history. And 6 weeks later, your father's car went off Route 9. Sophie's hands were flat on the counter. She was pressing them down deliberately because they wanted to shake, and she was refusing to let them. "And your wife," she said, "and your daughter." Jackson's jaw tightened. It was the only thing that moved on his face. "The fire was 8 months after your father died," he said. "Claire had been talking to a lawyer. She had some of her father's documents. She was going to," he stopped, restarted. "She was going to make it matter. She wanted it to mean something that her father died." Sophie looked at the photograph, at her father's easy smile, at the man beside him who would be dead within a year of the picture being taken. "How long have you known?" she asked. "I've known Pieces for 3 years," Jackson said. "I didn't have enough to do anything with. Just enough to not be able to stop moving." She understood that. She understood it in the way that only people who have carried grief with nowhere to put it understand it, the way it turns into kinetic energy, turns into motion, because if you stop moving, the weight of it will bury you where you stand. "The men who came to my door this morning," she said. "Mercer's people." Jackson's eyes sharpened. "When, an hour ago, 2 men in suits said they wanted to clear up the misunderstanding." Something moved across his face. "Did you let them in?" "No." "Good." He picked up the photograph from the counter. "Don't, not ever, and don't go anywhere alone, not until we figure out what they know." "We," she said. He looked at her. "You said we," she said. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him deciding something, some internal calculation that she was not entirely privy to. "You have the video," he said. "Half the country's seen your face. That's protection, but it's also a target. A woman going viral for embarrassing a Mercer." He shook his head slightly. "That family doesn't let things go." "I figured that out already." "Then you also figured out that you can't handle this alone." She wanted to argue. 3 years of handling everything alone had made argument her default. But she looked at the photograph of her father laughing in the sunlight, not knowing what was coming, and she thought about Danny saying Dad knew, and she thought about 2 men on her porch with business cards and politely worded threats, and the argument dissolved. "My brother," she said. "I need Danny safe first. Whatever else happens." "I know," Jackson said. "That's why I came back." Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. "Danny." She answered immediately. "Hey." "Sophie." His voice was controlled in the way that teenagers go controlled when they are actively scared and trying not to sound it. "There's a car outside the school. Been there since I got here. I don't recognize it. The guy inside keeps looking at the front entrance." She was already moving toward the door. "Stay inside. Don't come out for anyone except me. I'm coming." "Who is it? Is it because of the video?" "Stay inside, Danny." She hung up. She turned to Jackson and she saw immediately that he had heard enough. "My truck," he said. They moved, and as they crossed the parking lot of the Desert Mile Diner toward Jackson's truck, Sophie Blake felt the last threads of the ordinary life she had been carefully, exhaustedly maintaining snap clean. No more invisible. No more small. No more swallowing it down because it was easier than fighting. Something had shifted in her. The same thing that shifts in a person when they stop defending and start moving forward when fear runs out of fuel and something fiercer fills the tank in its place. She didn't know yet what her father had hidden. She didn't know yet the full shape of what Victor Mercer had done or how far back it went or how many lives had been burned to keep it quiet. But she knew this somewhere in the wreckage of her father's life. There was a truth that powerful men had killed to keep buried. And she was done being the kind of woman who let the dead stay silent. They got to Danny's school in 11 minutes. Jackson pulled into the front lot without slowing much, and Sophie was out of the truck before it fully stopped. She hit the front entrance at a near run and found Danny exactly where she told him to be, just inside the glass door's backpack on face, doing that thing where he was working very hard to look calm and not managing it entirely. She grabbed his arm. "You okay?" "I'm fine." He looked past her at Jackson climbing out of the truck. "Is that him?" "Yes, come on." "Sophie, what is actually happening?" "I'll explain in the truck. Move." The car Danny had spotted was still there, parked along the side street that ran adjacent to the school's east fence. Dark sedan, tinted windows, engine running. As Jackson's truck pulled out of the lot, Sophie watched the sedan in the passenger mirror. It didn't follow. It just sat there, which was somehow worse than if it had followed. "They're not following us," she said. "They don't need to," Jackson said. "They already know where you live." Danny in the back seat said quietly, "So what do we do?" Jackson kept his eyes on the road. "We don't go back to your apartment. Our stuff is there." "I know, we'll figure that out. But right now, the apartment is the first place they'll go if they decide to stop being polite." He glanced at Sophie. "You said your father left things. Documents, personal records. Where would they be?" Sophie thought about it. The truth was she had not gone through her father's belongings thoroughly. She had done what most grieving children do, sorted the surface layer, kept the photographs donated, the clothes left, the boxes in the spare room with a mental note that she would get to them when she was ready. She had not been ready. "There are boxes," she said, "at the apartment, in the back room. Then we need to go back for them." "You just said, fast in, fast out," he said. 10 minutes. What do you need to grab besides the boxes?" she thought. "Danny's medication, his school laptop, my father's boxes, that's it." "Okay." He took a turn heading back toward her neighborhood. "We go in together. You and Danny take the boxes and the personal items. I watch the street. If anything moves wrong, we leave without everything." "Understood." "Understood," she said. Danny leaned forward from the back seat and said to Jackson with the directness of a teenager who has decided to skip social niceties, "Where are you taking us?" "Nevada," Jackson said. "Why Nevada?" "Because I have people there who don't ask a lot of questions and don't open the door for strangers." Danny sat back. He looked at Sophie. She looked at him. In the wordless language of siblings who have raised each other through hard years, something passed between them. Not certainty, not comfort exactly, but a shared decision to trust because the alternatives were worse. The apartment was quiet when they got there. Too quiet in the way that familiar places get when something is wrong and you can't name what yet. Sophie moved fast, pulling the boxes from the back room while Danny grabbed his things. Jackson stood at the window with the lights off, watching the street below. "How many boxes?" he called back. "3." Sophie said, then pulled back the flap on the closest one and stopped. Her father's handwriting covered a yellow legal pad on top. Not notes, not casual notes. Dense, careful documentation, dates, property parcel numbers, names, amounts. Her father had been a county surveyor. He understood land records the way musicians understand pitch instinctively in his body, the pattern visible to him where others saw only data, and he had written it all down. "Jackson," she said. Something in her voice brought him across the room in 4 steps. He looked at the legal pad. He read the first page without touching it. She watched his expression stay very still in the way that people go still when something confirms what they feared, but hoped was wrong. "That name," she said, pointing. "Victor Mercer. It's on every 3rd line." "I see it. And this one, Kingman County Parcel 7-114. She looked up at him. That's the lot where they're building the casino. My father surveyed it 4 years ago. Your father found the discrepancy, Jackson said. Not a question. What discrepancy? He straightened. The land Victor Mercer is developing, part of it was never legally acquired. The original owners, three families who'd held that land for generations, they were pushed off. Intimidation, arson, two suspicious deaths, the sheriff ruled accidental. Your father's survey would have shown the original property lines. If he had documented it properly and filed it, he paused. It would have stopped the entire project. Hundreds of millions of dollars in development gone. Sophie sat back on her heels. He knew, she said. He found it, and he knew what it meant, and he hid it, Danny said from the doorway. They both looked at him. Danny was holding something, a small metal lockbox, the kind you get at hardware stores, dark green with a combination lock. I found this at the back of his closet after he died, Danny said. I thought it was just, I don't know, old papers or whatever. I never opened it. Do you know the combination? Sophie asked. No, but I know Dad. Danny crossed the room, sat down on the floor with the box in his lap, and started turning the dial. He used the same numbers for everything. Mom's birthday. He tried it. Nothing. His Army service number, the last 4 digits. He tried it. A pause. The lock clicked, don't open. None of them spoke. Inside the box was a small hardcover notebook. Not a legal pad, something more personal. The kind of notebook a man buys when he intends to write things he doesn't want to lose, and a USB drive and a folded photograph that Sophie recognized immediately as being from the same time period as the one Jackson carried. She picked up the notebook with hands that were steadier than she expected. Jackson, she said. Your father-in-law's name. What was it? Gerald Mays, he said quietly. She opened to the 3rd page of the notebook. Gerald came to me again today. He says we have to go to the FBI. I told him we need more time, more documentation. He's scared. I'm scared, too, but I won't write that here. Sophie's throat tightened. She kept reading. The land acquisition of records for parcels 7-114, 7-115, and 7-118 don't match the historical deeds. Someone altered the county database records. Not my survey, the underlying ownership records, which means someone inside the county recorder's office is on Mercer's payroll. I don't know who yet. If I file my survey and it conflicts with the altered database, it'll get flagged and buried and they'll know I know. She flipped forward. Gerald had his heart attack last Tuesday. He was 61 years old and he ran 5 miles every morning. I went to the funeral and Victor Mercer was there, and he shook my hand, and I looked at his face and I understood then that I am not dealing with a man who makes mistakes or loses his temper. I am dealing with a man who plans. Oh God, Sophie whispered. She turned to the last entry. The handwriting was faster here, less careful. I've made copies of everything. Survey records, deed discrepancies, the altered database files that Gerald managed to pull before he died. I've put everything on the drive. I don't know who to trust at the county level anymore. I don't know who to trust at the state level. I'm going to find a federal contact, someone outside this state entirely. But I need more time. I need to make sure Sophie and Danny are protected first. If something happens to me before I can move this forward, the drive has everything. Danny is smart enough to find it. Sophie is strong enough to do something with it. She stopped reading. She was aware that her face was wet and she hadn't noticed herself start crying. She pressed the back of her hand against her cheek hard and breathed. Her father had spent the last months of his life trying to protect them, trying to find a way to do the right thing without destroying them in the process. And someone had gotten to him before he could. Street's clear, Jackson said, his voice careful and low. But we need to go now. She closed the notebook, put it back in the box along with the USB drive and the photograph, stood up with the box under her arm. Take all 3 boxes, she told Danny. They moved. The drive to Nevada was 6 hours, and for the first 2 of them, nobody said much. Danny fell asleep in the back seat with his head against the window. Exhaustion finally overruling adrenaline the way it always does with teenagers once the immediate threat recedes. Sophie sat with the lockbox in her lap and watched the desert move past and thought about her father writing in that notebook with his hand moving fast because he knew he was running out of time. He had said she was strong enough. She was going to have to decide if that was true. Around the 3rd hour, she said, "Tell me about the compound." Jackson shifted slightly. It's not what you're picturing. I'm not picturing anything. Most people picture something from a movie, he said. Guys cleaning guns and drinking. That's not what it is. Then what is it? He was quiet for a moment, choosing words. Most of the men there are veterans, guys who came back from places and found out that the country they came back to didn't know what to do with them. Some of them have families, some don't. Some of them have histories they're not proud of. But they show up for each other. That's the thing that doesn't translate to the outside, the loyalty. He paused. It's not perfect, none of it is, but it's real. And you trust them. With my life, he said, I have, more than once. She nodded, and they'll help us. They'll help you, he said, because I'm asking them to. She looked at his profile in the dark of the cab. Why are you doing this, Jackson? Really? You could have turned around the second time too. You could have kept driving. He didn't answer right away. The road unfurled ahead of them in the headlights, and the desert held its enormous silence all around. And Sophie thought maybe he wasn't going to answer at all. Then he said, Claire used to say that when something wrong happens in front of you, you have two choices. You can become someone who looked away, or you can become someone who didn't. She said those were the only two kinds of people in the world, really. Everything else is just detail. Sophie looked at her hands on the lockbox. She sounds like she was remarkable, she said. She was, he said. Maya too. 8 years old, and she already had her mother's instinct for which battles mattered. His voice stayed level, but Sophie could hear what was underneath it, that specific deep grief that does not dissolve, that you simply learn to carry without letting it show. I spent 2 years being angry, just pure, useless angry. And then I spent a year driving, because Claire was right and I couldn't stop knowing she was right, and eventually you have to decide what kind of person you are. Sophie understood something then that she hadn't before. He hadn't stopped at the Desert Mile Diner by accident. He had been driving for 3 years in the direction of this moment, toward the file her father left, toward the evidence that connected all of it. Claire, Maya, Gerald Mays, Robert Blake, into a single shape of deliberate, calculated evil. He hadn't known that when he walked in, but some part of him had been aimed here all along. They reached the compound just before 2 in the morning. It was built into the rock and scrub of the high Nevada desert, not hidden exactly, but settled the way things get when they've been somewhere long enough to belong. There were lights inside, warm ones, and Sophie could hear voices and the sound of someone laughing at something in one of the back buildings. A man came out to meet them before Jackson even cut the engine. Big Sophie's age, or a few years older, with a prosthetic left arm that he carried with the ease of someone who had long since stopped noticing it, and an expression of intense, focused assessment that softened slightly when he recognized Jackson. You could have called, he said. I called twice, Jackson said. I was busy. The man looked at Sophie, then at Danny stumbling out of the backseat half asleep, then back at Jackson with a question on his face that was not unfriendly, but was very direct. Reyes, this is Sophie and Danny Blake, Jackson said. Robert Blake's kids. Something shifted in Reyes's expression. Something significant. Robert Blake, he said slowly. The surveyor. Sophie stared at him. You knew my father. Reyes looked at Jackson. There was an entire conversation in that look, the kind that only happens between people who have kept the same secret long enough that sharing it feels like setting down something very heavy. Your father contacted us, Reyes said to Sophie, about 14 months before he died. The desert wind moved between them. He reached out through a contact we had in the county, Reyes continued, said he had documentation on a land corruption scheme connected to a man named Victor Mercer. Said he needed to find people he could trust outside the system. He thought, Reyes paused, he thought the club might be motivated to help because of what happened to Jackson's family. Sophie turned to Jackson. You knew he contacted you. I didn't know at the time, Jackson said. I wasn't in a place to receive that kind of information back then. I wasn't functional. Reyes handled it. And then your father died, Reyes said quietly. And the trail went cold. We didn't know about the notebook. We didn't know he'd had time to document everything the way he did. He looked at the lockbox under Sophie's arm. Is that it? Yes, she said. Then your father didn't die for nothing, Reyes said. And neither did Claire and Maya. We just finally have what we need to prove it. Danny, standing beside Sophie, said nothing. He reached out and put his hand on her arm, and she reached across and covered it with her own. Inside the compound, the men who came out to unload the truck were careful with the boxes. Careful in the specific way that people are careful with things they understand the weight of. An older man with a gray beard took the boxes into what appeared to be a workroom without being asked. A woman Sophie hadn't expected, young, sharp-eyed, carrying a tactical tablet, started photographing the contents of the lockbox under a portable light. "That's Torres," Reyes said. "Former federal investigator. She left under interesting circumstances. She's been working with us for a year." Torres looked up briefly at Sophie. "Your father's survey work is meticulous," she said. "If the USB drive has what Reyes thinks it has, we can file a federal complaint within 72 hours. Sophie blinked. "You've seen his work before." "I've been building this case for 18 months, Torres said. "I just didn't have the primary source documentation. Your father was the only one who created original records that predate the database alteration. Without him, everything else was circumstantial." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Sophie had walked into this thinking she was bringing the evidence somewhere safe. She was realizing rapidly that she had walked into the center of something that had been in motion long before tonight, and she was not the newcomer she had imagined herself to be. She was the missing piece. She turned to Jackson, and she saw in his face that he had known this was possible, but had not known it was certain until this moment, and that the weight of it was sitting on him in a way he was managing carefully. "How long until Mercer knows where we are?" she asked. Reyes and Torres exchanged a glance, and in that half-second exchange, Sophie Blake read the answer that neither of them said out loud. He might already know. Torres didn't wait for anyone to ask the obvious question. She was already moving, already pulling up something on her tablet, already running through a checklist in her head that Sophie could see playing across her face in the form of rapid, focused micro-expressions. "We have a perimeter alarm system on the east and north approaches," Torres said. "Motion-triggered covers about a quarter-mile out. If anyone's coming in by vehicle, we'll have 4 minutes of warning, maybe 5. "And on foot?" Jackson asked. Torres looked at him. 2 minutes. Less if they know what they're doing." "They'll know what they're doing," Jackson said. Reyes had already turned and was moving toward the back of the compound with the particular focused walk of a man switching modes. Sophie had known men like that. Her father had been one in a quieter way. Men who had a civilian setting and a different setting underneath it. And when the situation required it, the switch happened without drama or announcement. Reyes was already in his other setting. "Danny," Sophie said. He was standing near the door, backpack still on, watching everything with the wide, absorbing attention of a teenager who is frightened but refuses to look it. He met her eyes. "I need you to stay in the interior room, the one Torres showed us. No windows." "Sophie, I'm not negotiating this one," she said. "Please." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and went. She turned back to Torres. "The USB drive, how long to process it?" "I've already started copying the files," Torres said. 20 minutes for the full transfer. Another hour to cross-reference against the existing documentation we have." She paused. "But Sophie, if what's on that drive is what your father described in the notebook, the original survey records the deed discrepancies, the altered database files, then we don't need an hour. We need about 20 minutes and a federal judge who's been waiting for something exactly like this for 8 months. Sophie stared at her. "You have a federal judge." "I have a federal prosecutor in Phoenix who has been building a parallel case against Mercer Development for environmental violations," Torres said. "She's been blocked at every turn because she can't find the original land records. The county database was altered so cleanly that without a primary source document predating the alteration." She held up the USB drive between 2 fingers. "This is the primary source document. You've been working toward this for a year," Sophie said, "and you never came to us. You never—" "I didn't know about you," Torres said simply. "I knew Robert Blake had been the surveyor. I knew he'd died. I assumed the documentation died with him." She set the drive back down gently. "Your father was smarter than anyone gave him credit for." Sophie felt that land in the center of her chest and stay there. She picked up the notebook from the table and held it, not reading it, just holding it. The weight of it was small and enormous, at the same time the way things are when they carry more meaning than their physical size can account for. "He knew he might not make it," she said. "He planned for the possibility that he wouldn't." "Yes," Torres said quietly. "He planned for us to find it." "Yes." Sophie set the notebook down. She straightened her back and took one long breath and said, "Tell me what you need from me." Torres nodded once with the crisp respect of one professional recognizing another. "I need you to be available to provide a sworn statement about how and where you found the documentation. Chain of custody matters enormously in federal proceedings. The fact that you and Danny found the lockbox and your father's personal belongings in your residence is significant. It establishes provenance." "Okay. And I need you to not contact anyone outside this compound tonight. Not Carla, not Marcus, not anyone from the diner, not a reporter, not a lawyer you found online. Nobody. My attorney doesn't exist anyway," Sophie said. Torres almost smiled. "Probably for the best right now." Jackson was at the window. He'd been at the window for the past several minutes, not pacing, just standing with the stillness of a man who has learned that pacing burns energy you might need later. "Reyes is setting up the outer positions," he said without turning around. 6 men, all of them know the terrain. "How long have you been preparing for something like this?" Sophie asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Since the fire," he said. "I didn't know specifically what shape it would take, but I knew it was coming. I knew that whatever Victor Mercer was protecting, he'd protect it violently. He always has." He finally turned from the window. 3 years of knowing a war was coming is a long time to prepare. Sophie looked around the room, at Torres working with focused speed, at the sound of Reyes's voice somewhere outside low and organized, at the compound that had seemed when they pulled up exhausted at 2 a.m. like simply a place to hide. She understood now that it was nothing so passive as that. It was a position, strategically chosen, defensively prepared, populated by people who had decided on exactly this kind of night that they were not going to be caught unprepared again. Her father had contacted these people, had trusted them with the most dangerous thing he owned, and he had been right to. That thought settled something in her that had been unsettled for 3 years. Then the first alarm went off. It was not loud, more of a pulse vibration from the device on Torres's tablet, but in the silence of the compound at 3 a.m, it was as loud as a gunshot. Torres was on her feet before the second pulse. Jackson was at the window. "East approach," Torres said, reading the screen. "Multiple contacts, at least 4 vehicles." "Time," Jackson said. 4 minutes, maybe less. They're moving fast." Sophie's first thought was Danny. Her second thought, arriving a half-second behind the first, was the USB drive. "Is the transfer done?" she asked. 60%, Torres said. "Is there a backup?" "I'm uploading to an encrypted remote server simultaneously," Torres said, already moving. "Even if they take the drive, the data is off-site." "How close to complete is the upload?" 40 minutes. "We don't have 40 minutes, Jackson said. "I know that," Torres said, "which is why we need to slow them down." There were voices now outside Reyes coordinating in the short, clear language of people who have rehearsed for exactly this. Sophie heard the sound of equipment being moved, positions being taken, and underneath all of it, the particular quality of focused calm that is more frightening than noise because it means everyone understands what they are facing. She went to Danny first. He was in the interior room, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, in the way that teenagers instinctively put the most solid thing available between themselves and the unknown. He looked up when she came in, and she sat down next to him on the floor, shoulder to shoulder, the way they had sat together in the days after their father's funeral when neither of them had words for anything. "They're here," she said. She didn't see the point of pretending otherwise. "Mercer's people." "Yes." He was quiet. Then, "Is Jackson?" "He's positioned. They all are. Danny, I need you to stay in this room no matter what you hear." "No matter what. Do you understand me?" "Yes. If something happens to me, Sophie." His voice cracked slightly, on her name just slightly, and she felt it in her ribs. "Don't say that." "If something happens," she said firmly, "Torres has the documentation and she knows what to do with it. You trust her. Okay, you trust her and you let her finish what Dad started." Danny put his head back against the wall and closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them, and there was something in them she recognized, the same thing she had seen in her own face in the mirror on the worst mornings of the past 3 years. The thing that was not hope, not optimism, not the absence of fear. The thing that was simply refusal. Refusal to fold. Refusal to let the worst thing win. "Okay," he said. She stood up. She squeezed his shoulder once. She went back out. The first sounds came 9 minutes after the alarm. Not the cinematic explosion of movies, not a dramatic breach. Just voices outside that were not the voices of the compound's own men. Commands being issued in the low professional tones of people who do this for money rather than belief, which somehow makes them more dangerous rather than less. Mercenaries don't hesitate, the way that ideologues sometimes do. Then the shooting started. It was sporadic at first. Testing, probing the perimeter, identifying positions. Reyes's men did not return fire indiscriminately, which told Sophie something about their discipline. They waited. They responded in measured bursts. She could hear Reyes's voice in the middle of it, steady and directional, adjusting positions the way a conductor adjusts an orchestra, calm amid the noise because the noise was expected. She was in the main building with Torres, who was watching two things simultaneously, the upload progress on her tablet and a camera feed from the outer perimeter that Jackson had handed her before he went outside. "Jackson's on the north side," Torres said, reading the feed. "Reyes is east. They've pushed the vehicles back about 200 meters. How many of them? I count 8, maybe 10. Torres looked up briefly. They're not trying to breach yet. They're containing, trying to keep us from leaving. They're waiting for something, Sophie said. Yes. Torres's eyes went back to the screen. Or someone. The upload hit 65%. The south approach alarm triggered. Someone circled around, Torres said. And for the first time, Sophie heard something in her voice that was not quite calm, not panic, not fear exactly, but the sharp recognition of a plan adjusting to a complication. How many on the south? 2, maybe 3. Torres was already on comms. Jackson, south side 2 or 3 contacts. They've split the approach. Jackson's voice came back flat and immediate. I see them. Hold the main building. Sophie looked at the tablet. 70%, 72. The sound of something heavy being forced a door. A gate came from somewhere at the back of the building. Torres was on her feet with a sidearm that Sophie had not noticed until this moment, already moving toward the rear corridor. Stay at the table, Torres said. Watch the upload. If it hits 100%, you close the laptop and you run to Danny's room and you lock the door. Torres. She was already gone. Sophie sat at the table with her eyes on the upload percentage and her hands flat on the surface and the sounds of the fight moving around the outside of the building like weather. 78, 80, 83. From somewhere outside, very close, she heard Jackson. Not words, just the sounds of close physical engagement, brutal and brief. Then silence. Then his voice controlled and clipped on the comms, south side clear. She let out a breath she had been holding for 2 minutes. 89, 91. A door opened behind her. She turned. The man who walked in was not one of the compound's people. She knew that immediately, the same way you know a wrong note in a piece of music you've heard 100 times. Something off in the way he moved, too careful, too deliberate, scanning rather than simply entering. He was holding a phone rather than a weapon, which was somehow more alarming. He looked at her with the businesslike expression of someone who has been sent to collect something specific. Ms. Blake, he said, I've been asked to bring you somewhere. I'm not going anywhere with you, she said. The alternative, he said, moving closer, is that this gets complicated. It's already complicated, she said. He reached for her arm. And Sophie Blake did something she had never done before in her life. She didn't back away. She didn't look toward the door hoping someone would come. She picked up the laptop with both hands and swung it into the side of his head with every ounce of force her body had, which it turned out, after 3 years of carrying loaded trays and boxes, and her brother's entire future was considerably more than the man expected. He went down sideways and stayed down. She looked at him on the floor, looked at the laptop in her hands, which had a cracked corner but was still running. 97%. She set it back on the table. She was still breathing hard, hands shaking now in the delayed way that hands shake when adrenaline finds its exit after the crisis, when Torres came back through the rear door and stopped dead at the sight of the man on the floor. She looked at Sophie. He came through the front, Sophie said. Torres looked at the laptop screen. 99%. You held the upload, Torres said. I held the upload, Sophie confirmed. 100%. The word complete appeared on the screen in green letters, and Sophie felt something release in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since the moment she opened her father's notebook. Maybe longer. Maybe since the night a detective knocked on her door and told her Robert Blake's car had gone off Route 9. Something that had been wound tight for 18 months finally slowly began to come undone. Torres was already on the phone. Not the compound comms, a different phone, a secure one she pulled from her vest. She was dialing a number Sophie suspected had been ready for a long time. "This is Torres," she said when it connected. "I have the documentation. Full chain of custody, original source files, cross-referenced against federal records. I'm ready to transmit." A pause. "Yes, tonight." Another pause shorter. "Wake him up." She hung up and looked at Sophie. "The federal prosecutor," Sophie said. "She's in Phoenix," Torres said. 4 hours from here." She looked around the room at the man on the floor, at the sounds of the firefight that were beginning to diminish outside, as Reyes's people pushed the mercenaries further back at the cracked laptop on the table showing a green complete. "We made it to morning," she said. "That's enough for now." Outside, she heard Jackson's boots on the gravel. He came through the door and took in the scene the same way he took in every scene, fast, complete, decisive. His eyes went to Sophie first, not Torres, not the man on the floor. "You're okay," he said. It was not entirely a question. "I held the upload," she said. He looked at the laptop, looked at her. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly. More like recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has spent 3 years looking for a reason to believe that the right people sometimes survive the wrong circumstances. "Your father would be proud of you," he said. Sophie pressed her lips together hard. She would not cry now. She had earned the right to cry later in a room by herself when Danny was safe, and the evidence was in the hands of people who could do something with it, and the long grinding war that her father had quietly started years ago was finally moving toward its last battle. But not now. "Tell me what happens next," she said, and Jackson sat down across from her at the table and told her. The federal prosecutor's name was Diana Marsh, and she arrived at the compound at 7:43 in the morning in a gray sedan with 2 FBI agents, in the particular exhaustion of a woman who had been building toward this moment for the better part of 2 years and was now running entirely on coffee and controlled fury. She shook Torres's hand first, then Sophie's. Her grip was firm and her eyes were the kind of direct that comes from spending years in rooms where people lie to your face and you have learned to look straight through the performance to the person underneath. "Ms. Blake," she said, "I've read your father's file. What he did documenting all above it, preserving the chain of evidence, the way he did that was exceptional work under extraordinary pressure." Sophie nodded. She didn't trust her voice entirely in that moment, so she kept the nod brief and professional and moved on. "The USB drive has everything," Torres said, handing Marsh the drive along with a printed chain of custody document she had apparently prepared sometime between the firefight and dawn. Original survey data deed records predating the database alteration correspondence between Robert Blake and Gerald Mays, and approximately 40 pages of handwritten documentation cross-referencing the property irregularities with Mercer Development's permit applications. Marsh turned the drive over in her hands. Something in her face shifted, not dramatically, just a small unlocking around the eyes, the way a person looks when they have been carrying a heavy thing for a long time, and someone finally tells them they can set it down. "How long until you can move on, Mercer?" Jackson asked from across the room. Marsh looked at him steadily. She knew who he was. She had clearly done her research on the way here. 48 hours, she said. Maybe less. I have a grand jury convened in Phoenix that has been waiting for primary source documentation. Once I get this in front of them and cross-referenced against our existing evidence." She paused. "Victor Mercer will not be a free man by the end of the week." The room was quiet for a moment with the weight of that. Jackson said nothing. He walked to the window and Sophie watched his back and understood that he was doing the same thing she was doing, trying to make the reality fit inside a frame that had only ever held grief. After 3 years of nothing, 48 hours sounded both impossibly short and unbearably long. Then one of the FBI agents stepped forward and said quietly, "There's something else you should know." Marsh turned to him. "What?" "We got a call from our field office in Phoenix 20 minutes ago. On the way here." The agent looked at Sophie, then back at Marsh. "Logan Mercer turned himself in this morning." The room went very still. "He what?" Sophie said. "Logan Mercer walked into the Phoenix FBI field office at 6:15 this morning with a private attorney and a prepared statement," the agent said. "He's offering full cooperation in exchange for prosecutorial consideration. He says his father ordered the arson on the Creed property. He says he has personal knowledge of at least 3 other incidents that were staged as accidents. He paused. He's been aware of his father's methods for years. Apparently, last night's raid on this compound was the line he wasn't willing to cross. Sophie stared at him. She had constructed a complete architecture of Logan Mercer in her mind, spoiled, cruel, irredeemable, the human embodiment of everything that destroyed her family, and the statement she had just heard did not fit that architecture at all. It didn't make him a good person. It didn't undo the diner, didn't undo any of it. But it complicated him in a way she hadn't expected and wasn't entirely sure what to do with. She looked at Jackson. His face was completely unreadable. He was looking at the floor jaw, tight hands at his sides. "Jackson," she said softly. "I heard it," he said. "Are you?" "I'm processing it," he said. Flat, controlled, honest. "Give me just a minute." She gave him the minute. When he looked up, his face had not softened exactly, but something had shifted in it. The specific grinding tension that had lived around his eyes for as long as she had known him, which was only days, though it felt longer, the way it always feels longer with people you meet at the exact moment when everything changes, had loosened just slightly. "It doesn't change what he did," Jackson said. "Not to Marsh, not to the room. To himself," she thought. "No," she agreed. "But it's something." "Yes," she said, "'tis something." Marsh was already on her phone, stepping toward the door, moving with the focused efficiency of someone whose timeline had just accelerated significantly. Torres was right behind her, tablet in hand, and the two of them moved into the morning air, talking rapidly in the clipped professional shorthand of people who have been waiting for this gear to engage. Sophie sat down at the table. The adrenaline was leaving now, and what it left behind was the particular bone-deep exhaustion that follows sustained fear. Not the tiredness of a long day, but the tiredness of a long war, the kind that settles into the joints and the back of the eyes and the place behind the sternum, where you have been holding yourself rigid for hours, for months, for years. Danny came out of the interior room. He looked at the FBI agents and at Marsh visible through the window and at his sister sitting at the table, and he came and sat beside her without saying anything. That was the thing about Danny that people didn't understand until they knew him. He had perfect instincts for when to talk and when to simply be present. Their father had been the same way. "Is it over?" he asked after a while. "Not yet," she said, "but it's close." He nodded. He picked up the notebook from the table, their father's notebook, the one with the fast handwriting at the end, and he held it the way Sophie had held it the night before. Not reading, just holding. "He knew we'd find it," Danny said. "He wrote as much," Sophie said. "He said you were strong enough." "He said you were smart enough to find it," she said. "He was right about that." Danny half smiled, the particular crooked smile he had inherited directly from Robert Blake. And Sophie felt the grief and the love arrive together the way they always did now. Inseparable, one the shadow of the other, and she had made her peace with that. The call came at 2 in the afternoon. Marsh came back into the compound with the expression of someone delivering a verdict, and every person in the room read that expression before she said a single word. "The grand jury returned an indictment 40 minutes ago," she said. "Victor Mercer is being taken into federal custody as we speak. The charges include racketeering, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and the wrongful deaths of Gerald Mays, Robert Blake, Claire Creed, and Maya Creed." She paused on the last 2 names. "Not for drama, because they deserve the pause. This is not a civil matter. This is federal criminal prosecution with full evidentiary support. He is not getting out on bail, not with what we have." No one cheered. That surprised Sophie slightly. She had half expected something celebratory from Reyes's men, who had fought through the night for this moment. But the room was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not the tight, holding breath quiet of danger. Something softer. The quiet of a weight finally set down. Reyes put his hand briefly on Jackson's shoulder. That was all. Jackson put his own hand over Reyes's for a moment. That was all. Some things between men who have been through the worst together do not require more than that. Sophie looked at Jackson across the room. He looked back at her, and she saw it in his face, in the way his shoulders sat, in the way he was breathing. She saw the exact moment when 3 years of driving without stopping became something that had a destination after all. Not happiness, not yet. The kind of peace that comes before happiness, the clearing of the ground before something new can grow. She crossed the room to him. She didn't have a speech prepared. She wasn't that kind of person, and he wasn't the kind of man who needed one. She just stood in front of him close enough that they were speaking only to each other, and she said, "Your family is going to be in those court documents. Claire and Maya, their names are going to be in the official federal record as victims. They're going to be real in the way that matters to the law." He swallowed once, hard. "It's not enough," he said. "No," she agreed. "It never is. But it's what we can do for them." He nodded slowly, something in his eyes that she had not seen before, some loosening of the thing that had been frozen for 3 years. "Your father," he said. "He started all of this. He's the reason any of it was possible." "I know," she said. "He protected you even when he knew he might not be around to do it himself." "I know," she said again softer. They stood there for a moment, in the way that two people stand who have been through something enormous together and are only beginning to understand the shape of what comes next. Then the twist that nobody in that room was expecting walked through the door on its own 2 feet. It was Torres. She had been outside with Marsh for the past hour, and she came back in with her tablet and an expression that Sophie had not seen on her face before, not the professional composure, not the focused investigator face, but something more personal, more shaken, more human. "There's one more thing," Torres said, "and I debated whether to tell you tonight or wait." She looked at Sophie. "I decided you've waited long enough." Sophie straightened. "The county recorder's Torres said. "The person on Mercer's payroll, the one who altered the database records." She paused. "We identified him 2 months ago, but couldn't move without compromising the investigation. His name is Dennis Farr. He's been with the county office for 11 years. "Okay," Sophie said slowly, reading Torres's face, sensing there was more. "He's also the first responder who filed the initial accident report on your father's car," Torres said. "He was on scene within 4 minutes of the crash, before the highway patrol, before the paramedics." Her voice was careful and precise, the way voices get when the information inside them is too large for casual delivery. "The FBI forensic team went back to the vehicle 2 months ago with what we knew about Mercer's methods. The brake line failure on your father's car was not accidental wear. It was deliberate." The room contracted. Sophie heard the words, heard them fully. She had always known in the way you know things you can't afford to know, the way you file them under things I will deal with later, and seal the drawer she had always known. But knowing something in your body and hearing it confirmed out loud in a federal context are two different kinds of knowing, and the second kind is permanent in a way the first one never quite is. Danny made a sound beside her, a single involuntary sound quickly controlled. She reached back without looking and found his hand and held it. "Dennis Farr," she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "Is in federal custody as of 2 hours ago," Torres said. "Charged as a co-conspirator in your father's murder." Murder. The words sat in the room. Official now, legal now, real in the way that only official words make things real, even when you have known the truth without them for a long time. Sophie closed her eyes for 3 seconds. She saw her father's face, not the photograph, not the face in newspaper clippings. His real face, the one she knew tired on Tuesday evenings when he came home from the county office laughing at bad jokes, driving her to work when her car wouldn't start, pressing his hand to the back of her head the way he had done since she was small, a wordless gesture that meant simply, "I'm here. You're okay. The world is hard, but you are not alone in it." She opened her eyes. "Good," she said. One word, but it carried everything. Marsh filed the federal complaint at 4 in the afternoon. By 6:03, major news networks had picked up the story. Not the diner video this time, the real story. The land corruption, the murders, the billionaire whose empire had been built on the bones of people who had trusted the system to protect them and found it couldn't until a county surveyor with a green lockbox and a biker with 3 years of grief and a former federal investigator with an encrypted server and 2 kids who refused to let their father's death mean nothing until all of them together had made it mean something. Sophie watched the coverage on Torres's tablet. She watched her father's name appear on screen. She watched the reporter say Robert Blake County Surveyor, whose documentation proved critical to the federal case. She watched and felt the specific, profound satisfaction of justice that is not clean and is not simple and does not bring anyone back but is undeniably real. Her phone rang. It was Carla. Sophie, Carla said, and she was crying, which she would deny later but was entirely audible. Are you watching the news? Yes, Sophie said. They're saying your dad… I know. Sophie, the whole country is watching. They've been covering the diner story all day, and now this, and everyone is… Carla stopped, started again. People are talking about your dad like he's a hero, because he is. He is Sophie. Sophie stepped outside because she needed the air and the space. She stood in the Nevada night and looked up at the kind of sky you only see away from city lights, the stars dense and unhurried. The same sky her father had looked at from his front porch on the nights she remembered him sitting out there late, thinking about things he didn't tell her about until it was too late. She understood now what he had been thinking about. She understood now that the weight he had been carrying, the weight she had sometimes seen on him in those final months, and misread as exhaustion, as age, as the ordinary tiredness of a working man, had been the terrible knowledge of what he'd found, and the love that made him careful about how he moved forward, because moving forward wrong might cost his children everything. He had been afraid, and he had been brave anyway. That, Sophie thought, is the real definition of courage. Not the absence of fear, the refusal to let fear make your decisions. Jackson came to stand beside her. He had a cup of coffee in each hand, and he offered her one in the same unhurried way he had done everything since the night she met him. No performance, no announcement, just the quiet, steady action of a man who pays attention to what people need. She took it. They stood there together looking at the sky. What do you do now? She asked. After, when it's all finished. I don't know, he said. It was the most honest answer he could have given. First time in 3 years, I don't have a specific reason to keep moving. Is that frightening? He considered it seriously the way he considered everything. A little, he said, and a little like standing still feels like something I can do again. She nodded. She understood that exactly. Danny wants to be a lawyer, she said. He told me tonight. He said all of this, what Dad did, what Torres did, he wants to do that. Be the person who builds the case that nobody else can build. He'd be good at it, Jackson said. He would, she agreed. He's got his father's instincts and apparently my willingness to hit people with laptops, so he should be formidable. Jackson made a sound that she realized after a moment was a laugh. An actual laugh, short, surprised, genuine, and the sound of it in the dark was so unexpected and so human that she felt her own mouth curve in response. 3 months later, the Desert Mile Diner reopened. Marcus had closed it during the investigation and the media storm that followed, not because it had done anything wrong, but because some spaces need to breathe before they can become themselves again. He repainted the exterior. He fixed the overhead light in the corner booth that had been burned out for 6 months. He put new menus on the tables and a small frame on the wall near the register, a photograph of Robert Blake taken on a sunny day in front of a county building, smiling the easy smile that Sophie knew from 100 ordinary moments of his life. Below the photograph in simple text, in memory of a man who knew the difference between looking away and standing up. The morning of the reopening, Sophie Blake drove to the diner in a car that now ran reliably in clothes that were not held together by 3 years of careful mending, with her brother in the passenger seat arguing with her about the radio, the way brothers argue with sisters, when the world has given them back the luxury of ordinary disagreements. She walked in, she tied on her apron, she smiled at Carla across the counter. Carla, who had kept the tip jar going and the Instagram account updated and had cried openly on 3 separate occasions during the news coverage and would deny all of it. And in the corner booth where the light was finally working, a man with gray threaded hair and a worn leather vest was already sitting with a cup of coffee watching her cross the room with the quiet attention of someone who has decided to stop moving and start arriving. She brought him a fresh cup, set it down. He wrapped both hands around it. No words needed. Because the People's Society had written off as too small, too scared, too powerless to matter. The waitress on the floor, the biker in the corner, the surveyor with his notebook, the brother who refused to stop asking questions, had turned out to be exactly the kind of people who changed things. Not because they were extraordinary, because when everyone else looked away, they didn't. And that, in the end, is the only kind of courage the world has ever actually needed.